Hi, Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, CEO of Food Maven and co-chair of Denver Startup Week, the largest free entrepreneurial event in the world, and it's only possible thanks to the support of our sponsors. We have nearly 40 sponsor companies who contribute to make DSW possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our title sponsors, Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Xero. Our track sponsors who have made all the great content you're hearing today possible: Battery 621 in the Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline event sponsors are bringing you inspiration from around the country. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now let's get to it.
Quizlet is a global learning platform that provides engaging study tools to help people practice and master whatever they're learning. Every month, over 50 million people use Quizlet to study any subject imaginable, for school, work, or as part of their personal interests.
Quizlet is super efficient, and I often, walk to class with it on my phone or even just before I go to sleep.
Combining cognitive science and machine learning, Quizlet guides students through adaptive study activities to confidently reach their learning goals. Quizlet has over 200 employees across 3 offices in San Francisco, Denver, and London.
Being at the Denver Quizlet office for the last year has been pretty incredible. Seeing the office grow while maintaining its, core connections to our values. It's been an incredible experience to be a part of, seeing how humble, candid, and open everyone has been, and being part of a mission-driven company in a time of uncertainty has been incredibly rewarding. So I look forward to, what the future brings, because the last year has been a wonderful experience. Thank you, Quizlet.
Hey everyone, my name's Adam Bauman and I'm part of the Quizlet team here in Denver. I'm proud to work for a company that's goal is to help every single person on this earth become a better lifelong learner. One of my favorite things about working at Quizlet is how much we follow our company values. There's always learning opportunities. We encourage everybody to teach themselves something new, as well as help each other learn. Whether it's from art classes or lunch and learn talks on latest technologies, there's always something new to find and help yourself grow. And I really feel like that's one of the best things that any company can offer is growth and opportunity.
Thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping to keep DSW free and accessible for all. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Denver Startup Week, Day 3. I'm Connor Swanson, the Developer Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Thank you for joining us for our first ever virtual Denver Startup Week. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we are more powerful when we come together as a community to share ideas and help make each other better. And here we are virtually, showing the world what Denver is made of. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, and the combination of those identities. There is something for everyone at DSW. Thank you for joining us. With that said, I'm very excited for our morning session today, advocating for yourself with precision and passion. Please welcome our panelists, Meagan, Kaelyn, and Carissa.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to get the slides up and we'll get started. Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm very excited to get started. As Connor just mentioned, we are on the developer track, but if you are not an engineer, if you just work in the technology org, or you just want general tips and tricks, please still stay. A lot of our examples are going to be tied to engineers specifically, but there are a lot of things that everybody can use as you move forward. So we invite you all to stay, even if you're not a developer. So again, this is Advocating for Yourself with Precision and Passion. My name is Kalyn Eshleman. I am a senior engineer at Ibotta, and with me I have my co-host.
I'm Meagan Cooney. I'm an engineering manager at Ibotta.
And we have our lovely moderator. She's going to be helping us with our chat. There are quite a few of you in this in live studio audience. So I'm going to have her introduce herself real quick.
Hi, I'm Teresa Lichty. I'm an associate engineer at Ibotta.
Yep, so she'll be helping kind of parse through some of your comments, presenting the questions in there, and helping us read some aloud for those of you watching on YouTube. So just to start out, I already kind of hinted at this, but this presentation does have interactive content. We are going to ask you, please participate in Zoom chat, and we have a very special big screen. I will explain what that is in a second. But we all learn from each other. Megan and I and Teresa want to learn from you as well. So we are going to ask that you participate either in Zoom chat, or if you can get up on the big screen, your answer will actually show up on our slides theoretically, which is pretty cool. So just a warning about that. We are going to have interactive content. As always, because we are a community, please be respectful and understanding of what everybody else says. So what you're going to need for today, just a place for your notes. This is a workshop, so we are hoping that you leave with some concrete examples that you can go off and use the same process later on. You will need your Zoom chat, as I mentioned. And then if you're going to make it on the big screen, you will need your phone or a just browser window. So let's get started. I believe Teresa is going to put this in the chat, but if you could please go to pollev.com/ and I'm sorry, my name is so long, Kaelyn Eshleman 139, or you can text that code to that number. The big screen only has 25 votes that it can show at one time. So if you see that the survey is full, please just move it into the chat, and we will read out good examples from there as well. Let's just start with an easy one. What is your favorite color? So get it in there. Mine's green. Megan, what's yours?
Pink, but I also really like red. So any kind of shades in that color scheme. Oh,
yeah. So you'll notice on here, it also says that the answers to this poll are anonymous. So in future ones, if you're worried about it, we won't have your name associated with it at all. Thank you all for giving us your colors. Let's do a slightly more meaningful question for today. What are you hoping to get from this workshop? We're going to cover everything from resumes to LinkedIn to self-reviews. So I'm curious what you all are trying to get out of it. I know I'm really excited to hear other examples from you all today. Megan, what are you really excited about?
I'm also really excited to hear examples. I think one thing that I always kind of struggle with when I'm writing a self-review or trying to put something out of myself out there is really kind of thinking about the impact. I don't know if some of that kind of has to do with imposter syndrome, but I definitely feel that I sometimes kind of struggle with that a lot.
Yeah, I see a lot coming through here. Confidence is a big one. That is one of our key topics for today. So hopefully you will get some good stuff out of it. All right.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for sharing.
Oops, sorry.
Yep. All right. So before we dive in, we kind of really want to talk about why Kaelyn and I initially got really interested in this subject and why we're so passionate about it now. It was something we started talking about actually almost a year ago, during the 2019 end of year review cycle. And we started looking into some of the research, and we found that regardless of industry, women consistently underrate themselves compared to equally performing male counterparts. And there's a bunch of research out there. So we started seeing this and we started thinking about like, wait, how does this impact like how we think about ourselves? And it seems like it's probably likely impacting a lot of our peers. And so They found in this really interesting article that women don't self-promote as much as men in general, and there's a substantial gender gap in self-promotion, and that women systematically provided less favorable assessments of their own past performances and potential future ability than equally performing men. And their study versions revealed that this gender gap was not driven by confidence or by strategic initiatives, and that it was robust both in the face of ambiguity and under increased transparency. So we were kind of curious. We have another poll. According to one of our studies that we looked at, on average, men rate themselves what percentage higher than women on self-reviews? Looks like so far we've got a couple votes for.
A lot of people think 52%.
Yeah.
Give you all a second. I know initially I thought it was D.
I did too. And I don't know if that was just my own kind of imposter syndrome showing, but, and so they found that there is a 33% difference in how men rate themselves compared to equally performing women. And so they looked and they found that there might be two factors that influence people's level of self-promotion: confidence, because you might not know what your actual performance is, and strategic initiatives, which is how you kind of talk up your performance to get a raise or promotion. And so that was something that we thought was kind of interesting in light of all these things that we think about.
Yeah, so those are kind of the two key things. A lot of you said confidence at the beginning. That is definitely one of the things we're going to talk about today. The other one is that strategic incentives. So what's going to happen? I'm going to give you an overview real quick of the terminology we are going to use throughout our workshop today. Then we will dive into the actual workshop portion. And then we're going to end today with just some very quick tips and tricks, very fast ones that you can take away. With all of this, I do want to caveat, we're going to give you a lot of information. You do not have to do everything we tell you to do today. If you can leave with one or two tips or tricks to implement in your life after this, that's great. I know it can feel really overwhelming when you get hit rapid fire, but we're hoping that you get at least one out of this. So moving on to kind of the terminology piece. We're going to start by talking about highlighting your value. So in our workshop, that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to talk about highlighting your value. And you might notice that there is a Venn diagram here with that middle part shaded. And the reason for that is really around that strategic incentive part. So talking up your performance. We want you to not only talk up your performance, but identify that overlap between what your company values or your future company values and what you've done. It's much more meaningful to them if you can show how your performance impacts their values rather than just your performance in general. So we're going to work on identifying that overlap space. The second part of that is we have interests outside of what we've actually been able to perform. We have things that we want to do as developers outside of our normal work time. But we're still going to focus on that overlap between company's interest and your interest with either the position you currently have or one that you would be applying for. The second half of this is quantifying your value. So after you've kind of highlighted it, we want to take it a step further and say, let's quantify this. Let's make this a little bit more meaningful. The way you do that is through confidence, which again, in our throughout this presentation, we're really talking about just understanding your performance. So not being overly confident, not being underconfident, just having an understanding of where you're actually performing. And the other half of this is we're going to do that through accuracy and metrics. I think the metrics is the hardest part. I know I struggle with it, but we're going to try to work together as a group and come up with some good metrics that you all can use moving forward.
Yeah, so this is something that I personally kind of struggle with, especially as an engineer. It's really hard to do self-promotion, especially if you have imposter syndrome. And even if you are more confident, like it is still kind of hard to think of yourself as kind of marketing yourself. But it's really important to not let your marketing materials or your self-ratings hold yourself back. And so what do we mean by marketing materials? We mean things like your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn, your self-reviews, and your one-on-ones. The one-on-ones thing is kind of interesting because your manager might not be around all the time. So you do have to kind of think about like, this is my performance and I want to make sure that they know what I've been doing.
Yeah. So that just as a reminder, Megan is a manager. So take that to heart. Your managers absolutely need to know what you're doing because they're not with you every single meeting or every project you're in. Also, before we move on, I did just notice a Q&A question. Thank you for putting it in there. Our chat is going to get pretty busy. So if you could please, if you have any questions throughout it, just throw it in Q&A and we'll watch it there. So let's get into the workshop.
Yeah, thank you so much Therese for helping us along with this, and we're really excited to kind of get into the more hands-on portion. Just a reminder that anything you want to do, you can either just write it in your own notes, or if you feel comfortable, you can share it in the chat. So we really want to focus on how to highlight your value and what are some of the things that you can focus on that kind of are that intersection of the things that you're really passionate about and interested in, what the engineering community as a whole or your company or a future company might be interested in. So one thing that I really like to think about is, what is the story that you're trying to tell? I'm in engineering management and I'm interested in moving up that track. So a lot of the story that I try to tell is around kind of like cross-functional activities or things that show leadership and that kind of thing. So those are the things that I would emphasize in a self-review. And some of the other questions that I like to really keep in mind are, where are you at? Where do you want to go in terms of your career? What makes you unique? And what are you missing? Like if there's things that as you kind of start thinking about your overall kind of looking at your past experience holistically, like what are the things that kind of stand out as themes that might help you kind of see where you're going and or what might you not have yet in order to get there? And so Kaelyn has her story too.
Oh. Yeah. We're going to dive into the workshop, but I use these same questions when I'm like trying to convince my manager or whoever that I am ready to go to the next level in my one-on-ones, self-reviews, all that type of thing. I would say like one small piece of advice here is know what your story is, try to define it for yourself, and then feed it throughout your one-on-ones so it doesn't all of a sudden come out during your self-review at the end of the year. But for me, Megan mentioned that she's more interested in the manager track. I'm actually more interested in the tech track. So I tend to talk about things like mentorship, leading tech projects, architectural design, that type of stuff to really help me sell my story, because I believe that's what's going to help me get to the next level. So we're going to just start by identifying that overlap, company interest and your interest, or company's values and your performance. And the way I want us to do that is just in your notes. I want you to think about a specific project or initiative you are currently working on, and then a company value or an engineering pillar it supports. So if you are new to software, you're just trying to jump in, maybe, and you don't have like a current company, just think about what does the engineering community tend to care about and try to place it in there. So the example I came up with, which is slightly dated because it's from Q3 of last year, but as Megan said, we gave this presentation initially almost a year ago. So I apologize that it's a little dated, but the initiative that I have done is interview lead. And the value that my company had at the time was to hire a lot more engineers by Q3. So I can see how me being an interview lead helps support that. So we're going to give you a minute or so. Try to write that down in your notebook. And as Megan mentioned, if you're comfortable, please post it in chat. It's incredibly helpful for others to hear your examples, because I know sometimes we see something and we're like, oh, I did that too. And that's a good one for me to use later on.
Hey, Kaelyn and Megan. While we're
Yeah.
letting some answers come in, we have a question in the Q&A. Can you define what a self-review is?
Yeah, so self-reviews are usually at mid-year or end of year, sorry. Excuse me. And it's usually just asking you to reflect on your performance. I know at Ibotta, we have to reflect on our goals for the year. So we have to set goals at the beginning and then review them at the end. So the self-review is just saying, how well did you meet that for us? It also has a reflection on company values. So we have our, 5 company values. And so just reflecting on how we've met those.
It's kind of really useful both as like a check-in and also a way to frame your future goals and kind of level set where you're at and where you're going. Especially, and I've been at companies where we haven't had really a formal review process. And so I've taken notes for myself on like, okay, like even if don't have an official one, how do I help that in the future? Oh.
Thank you for sharing some in the chat. Therese just shared one. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube or watching this later, it says, I'm going to be working on a COVID-19 testing registration confirmation page that supports the company's value of keeping people healthy and preventing the spread of virus. That's an excellent example, very timely. I really, really like that one. All right, I think just for time's sake, we're going to move forward with the next one, but please keep posting them in chat. They're really helpful. Megan, do you want to read one more example real quick?
Yeah, I really like Kate's. She works in HR and recruiting for a tech agency, and she's working on building out their employer brand for their builder office, and this aligns with their company goal of engineering excellence. So, yeah.
Perfect. All right.
All right. So when I'm trying to think about what kind of things will show up in my self-review or that I'll talk about in the future, I really kind of like to think about some of the challenging situations that I might have faced in the last year or two. And so this can look like things like being part of an on-call incident resolution because maybe something happened and you changed process because of this, and you led a new initiative and you realized that perhaps there were some alerts that were paging that were non-actionable, and you took the charge and helped fix that. Maybe something you discovered led to an architectural change and you organized meetings with a bunch of other people in the engineering department to really kind of find a new solution. Or maybe you were doing a really complicated debugging and you learned a lot more about the system, and you maybe even used like a language you were less familiar with, and it was a really great way to stretch yourself that way. Maybe you were part of changing a course in a project, or ramping up on a new tech stack, or being a tech lead, especially for the first time, or you've been part of onboarding new engineers. I find these are all kind of ways to really kind of stretch your ability and grow as an engineer or a member of the technical community.
Yeah, before we dive into the workshop part of this, just something I want to call out. That first, tying back to the questions that we listed, like where are you at, what are you missing, that type of thing. The where are you at is really that first section we did. This is kind of getting at what are you maybe missing, and where do you want to go?
Yeah, so in your own notes, identify a challenging situation you recently faced, lessons you learned from that situation, and any specific actions that you took afterwards. So an example that we had was I introduced a new tech stack that no one on my team was really familiar with, and we ended up missing a project deadline. The lessons we learned were that we needed to allocate more time for having learning built in and to take the developer skill set into consideration when we were picking the tech stack more in the future. Some of the actions going forward that I've really kept in mind were to have more pairing sessions, including also asking for help from people outside of our team and doing internal teach outs and learnings from the stack. And also maybe we kind of had to fundamentally reevaluate the MVP timeline. So if everyone wants to take a few minutes and think about a challenging situation that you really recently faced. And if you feel comfortable, share it in the chat.
Great. So we have an example in our chat from Karen. So the challenge was ran code for multiple days and realized it wasn't saving. That's frustrating. Lessons learned was to check it periodically, and the actions were to add some tests. That's great. That's a wonderful example.
Oh, that's a great one too, from John. From John. He knew a little bit about survey design, needed to focus more on quantitative methods, read and then led a lunch and learn on good surveys. So that's, I think, exactly some of the things that I challenge myself and also my team to do is once you've kind of made it through that challenge, to make sure that you share it out to other people.
Great. Thank you all for posting your challenges, learnings in there. I believe there is a way for us to get the examples later on. So if you're watching this later, I think I'm going to try to get them out somehow so we don't lose them all. All right, so the next part of this, at the beginning, I did mention highlighting your value is not only talking about your performance, which was the first two, but also your passions. And so we want to talk about and start trying to identify some of them. So just some examples. Teach outs and presentations might be one of your passions. I know one of the examples Megan just read, you did a teach out. If that's something you're passionate about, bring it up more often. Talk about why you use them, why they're beneficial. Maybe your passion is cultural work. So D&I, any engineering groups, mentorship, that type of stuff. Hackathons, that's actually, I stole this from one of my coworkers on my team. She realized that our team wanted to have a little bit more fun, a little more flexibility. So she created a way for us to do a hackathon, essentially once a quarter at the very least, which is super fun and exciting. I'm very excited to do it. And I'm glad she took the initiative to do that. The other thing is like any frameworks, languages, testing practices. If there's a new shiny out there that you have been working on the side that can help grow your company's business, talk about all of those things. They're all important. I usually will say that a lot of this passion stuff ends up showing up in my interviews when I do interviews or in my like summary statements, but overall highlight them.
Yeah, and another thing that I really like to think about is expressing a reoccurring interest that you can show with multiple examples of things you've done, either in your self-review or on your LinkedIn or on your resume. And maybe some of these interests are things like UX and UI design. I know that I'm particularly passionate about it, and I know a couple other people who are as well. And then either maybe accessibility, application security, or automated testing. Maybe there's an architectural pattern that you learned at one job, and then you brought it to another one, and then that was to show something about having really that technical leadership and bringing those architectural skills and also your familiarity with that pattern. And so that's really interesting. And then maybe also you're involved in community outreach in some sort of way, and there's multiple things that you do that really express that passion and maybe also tie into some leadership opportunities. So in your own notes, identify a technology passion, what goes above and beyond kind of your day job, and why is that important? So an example that we have of that is the initiative is we are starting a women in engineering group. And why did it matter? Because there was a drop in retention of women engineers. And so having a community is really shown to help that. So we're going to give everyone a couple minutes to think about your initiative and why it matters. And if you feel comfortable, Once again, please share in the chat, but no pressure.
We have one quick question that we can address while we're waiting for answers. Wendy would like to know, can you explain what a hackathon is?
Yeah, so a hackathon is just a one day, it can be multiple days, but usually a one-day event where engineers come up with projects that they want to work on, or they can be submitted from product. And then the whole team kind of rallies around that for a day and then executes against it and just tries to get it done in a day, which is pretty fun. Very different than what we normally do, where, you know, something might be planned out over 2 weeks. It's a fun challenge to try to get done in a day.
Yeah, we've also kind of used the hackathon concept to do like documentation hacks and like really kind of just get everyone in the room or in the room virtually to work on a similar thing.
Yeah. So we got a good example in here from Karen. I mentor for data science boot camp because I like to help others who are in the same situation I was in a few years ago to break into the industry. That's great. I would challenge you to, now that you have, like, that definitely matters. When you're trying to sell it to your company, why does that matter to them? And that's one way you can do it, is by saying, I'm helping you funnel new data scientists into your organization, right? You're helping with recruiting, you're identifying solid data scientists early. Megan, do you want to read another example?
Ooh, this one's actually related to one of my former ones. Yep, and also Tiff's. As a former designer, she is extremely passionate about UI and UX, and Tiff really loves working on our product team with our product team to iterate on designs to give our users an amazing experience and gain their trust. I think that's really important and a really great way of framing that.
Awesome. These are great. So let's wrap up the highlighting you section. When you're highlighting yourself in all of these different marketing ways, so resume, LinkedIn, all that type of stuff, I would say start by mining recent experiences. It's much easier for us as individuals to talk about things that we are currently doing rather than something that happened a year and a half ago or 3 years ago or whatever it might be. Identify those common themes between ourselves and the company or engineering community. Fill in the gaps in somebody's perception. If you don't, if you're like, yeah, I'm great, I'm not missing anything, what might somebody realize? I'm so sorry. I have something in my throat. Okay. Fill in the gap in somebody's perception. So identifying, like, looking at their resume, what might they realize that you're missing, even if you're not missing it, and then fill it in from there. Embrace discomfort because you're learning. That all those challenging situations that you listed means that you're learning from them. So really identify those lessons learned. And as always, look ahead. Where are you trying to get to next? Whether that's breaking into the career for the first time, moving up, switching to managerial type stuff, whatever that might be.
All right, so this is the part that I always really struggle with, which is quantifying your value and really thinking about how what you're doing kind of connects with the overall engineering community or perhaps your company or a future company, and the impact that you have in finding ways to really accentuate that. So one of the things I like to keep in mind are, what are the key metrics that the engineering community cares about, and how do you contribute to those metrics? And so some of the specific metrics that we kind of brainstormed and tried to kind of keep in the back of our minds are maybe like time savings, maybe monetary savings, maybe you really cut down response times on the website or app that you work on. Maybe you contributed a lot to the general uptime or general reliability. And then, or maybe, and this is where I kind of put on my managerial hat, you cut down on the cycle time of your team.
Yeah, one other one that came up yesterday in our practice one, somebody mentioned how many run books they were able to update on an on-call incident. I thought that was a great one as well. So when you're thinking about all these metrics, a good way to start identifying them, because identifying metrics, I think, is one of the hardest things to do. Think about the impact that you have in the radius of those people. So maybe you are a part of a mentee-mentor relationship. If you've set goals at the beginning of that relationship, how are you progressing towards them? If you get feedback from your mentee or your mentor, what does that feedback look like? How can you try to quantify some of that? Then, we have our teams that we work with every day. We might have other engineers. For those of you who are not in engineering, the rest of your department. You have the overall company, the broader technology community. And then for those of us who are working on something that has users of or products, we can get a lot of feedback from them as well. So I think as you touch on each of these different radius, if you start thinking about metrics that apply to them, it's pretty useful. I'll give one quick example from the company radius. My product manager asked us to do a very quick button because our business team needed it. They had a process that was taking them 2 hours on average to do. That's a very slow iteration time. With a small team of other engineers, we were able to implement a quick indexing button that dropped that 2 hours down to 10 seconds. So we had a pretty large impact on our company's overall efficiency. So even though it was in a different department, we still had a pretty big impact there. So in your own notes, with this, I will say I would just use the first one that you used. So what specific project or initiative you are currently working on from the very first part of the workshop, a key metric, and then the overall impact that might have. So the metric the initiative I gave earlier was that I was an interview lead. The actual key metric that we had for the company was to hire 50 new engineers by the end of Q3. My overall impact was that I did 30 plus interviews. So that means I spent more than 30 hours of my time interviewing people, but I also got to directly hire 18 of them. So of the 50, I got to impact 18 of that. That also means I got to expand my network by 18 engineers. So it was win-win on that one. So go ahead, look at the first project, or if you want to come up with a new one, that's fine, and start getting those key metrics. And the impact right now might be hard for you to know if you don't know those things off the top of your head. So don't worry so much about identifying the impact, but if you can get that key metric so that you can go back and look at it later, that's a good one. So give you a minute to kind of think that through.
Again, as we are waiting for some answers to come into the chat, we have a question, which is super relevant, from Tiffany. Asks, what if you are a recent graduate who has no business analytics job experience? How do you identify metrics to prepare for interviews as a new grad? She asks, should I create projects that can demonstrate these metrics mentioned in a hypothetical way? What would you say to graduates about coming up with metrics?
Yeah, I think definitely talking through hypotheticals is important. I think one of the things I look for as an interviewer, especially with new grads or bootcamp grads, is, are they thinking about metrics? Are they considering uptime, response times, that type of thing, even if it's not fully fleshed out. Just knowing that it's on your mind is a good way to just like get the foot in the door. But if you have side projects that you've been working on and you have some users, you can get some feedback from them. What did they like about your app? What did they not like? That type of thing. Megan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like it might not even have to be side projects. It could be something that you've worked on in a class. Maybe there's a lot of collaboration that happens in school around projects, and maybe there's something that happened on a project that you can think about how what the impact and the metrics may have been there.
Thank you for that question. That's a very relevant question. Give everybody another 30 seconds or so. So it looks like John had one where his initiative was web redesign for a fire department. That's cool. Metric was add self-service tasks to the website by the end of 2020. Impact was 50% of the self-service tasks were done using the website. That's wonderful. I think the way you go one step further, if you can find the metric, is how much overall time savings that gave them. And then if you can equate it to monetary stuff, that's usually a pretty big win for a company. You can talk about monetary savings in relationship to time savings.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you everyone so much for your answers. So kind of to wrap this up for quantifying your value, and like find ways to weave those metrics throughout whatever you're working on. And also it's really important to kind of go beyond the what. So like it's really great to build something, but kind of like now that you've built it, like what is the impact? What are the things you've used? And what did you learn? And what metrics kind of are part of that? And then also you can really gather or solicit feedback from your radius. And that can really help you either improve what you're currently doing or find things to include on your self-review or on your resume or that kind of thing. And also it's really important to kind of keep looking ahead. Because having these numbers really does kind of make it easier to be confident about what you've done. It really kind of helps frame some of the things that you've done, and it's something that I think about as well when I'm trying to kind of add something and it's like, oh, what impact did this actually have? I don't really know if I should be bragging about it. But then once I really think about like, oh, like this really did change this, so this factor or this thing, it's like, oh, cool. Like that really is something that's really awesome and that I can hold to myself.
Yeah, also with looking ahead, I have a slightly different way of looking at that. No pun intended. I didn't mean to repeat the word looking, but you can, when you're starting a new project, you can start identifying what are the metrics of success. And then as you complete it, you can talk about that. So if you plan for what metrics you're going to use to talk through the impact of something early in the project, it makes that much easier. So for those of us who have PMs, they are very data driven. For the data scientists, they're obviously very data driven. They probably have some good ideas. If you're struggling on what metrics matter to your company, I would definitely say talk to analysts, talk to data scientists, talk to your PMs. They all have good ideas. That's part of their job, is to kind of bake in what is the measure of success there. And they can definitely help you with that. So just another thought on the looking ahead bit. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to dive into some very quick tips and tricks. We're going to try to get through this section relatively quickly so we have time for live Q&A at the end. So thank you all again for participating in that workshop, presenting your examples in the chat, allowing us to read them out loud. That was wonderful. So first tip and trick on the what is your story, and kind of trying to tie in that highlighting with quantifying. I think usually the path I like to follow is starting with what are my actions, what was the impact I was hoping to make, and what were the overall results, and telling my story that way when it comes to specific projects. Next tip is just to write stuff down as it happens. For me, I know that like if I have to go write about something that happened 6 months ago, I end up using my Google Calendar, being like, what did happen? Who did I meet with? But I've taken to starting writing stuff down as it's going on. And that's helped me a lot. I actually do this because of one of my other coworkers. She has this amazing Google spreadsheet that has what ticket she worked on, what technology it used, what she learned from it, and then any other questions she has. She uses it also for debugging to go back and see if she ran into that problem before. But she uses it in her end of year self-reviews and writing her resume and updating it so that she has all of that kind of already laid out. Not saying you have to go make a beautiful Google sheet. I certainly do not. It's just a running list in my notebook, but write stuff down. Megan, do you want to talk about the Slack bot we have in the Women in Engineering?
Oh, yeah. One of the members of our Women Engineering group set up a new Slack bot to remind us on every Friday at 9 a.m. to kind of take a second and think about what we've accomplished that week and really highlight it. And I think it's really cool. And it's a great way to remember your achievements and also celebrate other people's.
Yeah, I like it as a reminder to be like, what did I achieve this week? So that's a good one. This is kind of one way. We've been talking a lot about gathering feedback, but I think giving specific and meaningful feedback is incredibly important. As you start doing that for your coworkers, other engineers in your network, or other professionals in your network, that starts creating a give and take relationship where you both can give meaningful feedback. I know in general, people tend to think of feedback as negative. I'm actually talking about both positive and negative feedback here. What are your coworkers doing well? I would say look up the SBI model for giving feedback. That's a bit beyond our time for today, but a good method. So the second half of that, if you don't get feedback just handed to you, go gather it, solicit it from that radius. It's really helpful, and you can start driving some key themes. So even if you don't have a specific metric, if you can pull out like an overall theme and say this many people have said this, that's now a metric that you didn't know you had before.
Yeah, another thing I find really useful is to use kind of your personal or professional goals to help you tell the story. And that is something you can kind of keep in mind and really kind of work through whatever you've been working on, or like whatever marketing material you're revising. And kind of related to that, I think it's really important to what I call your elevator pitch. The kind of idea of like when you first meet someone new in either like a meetup or an interview, being able to kind of give that really quick overview of who you are, what you are currently doing, and where you're going. And then I think it's also really important to kind of just get the buzzwords out of the way, because it's really important to have those in general, but I think that they're kind of something to have, but kind of like, okay, like what is the next aspect of this? Where did you go with whatever that buzzword that you've been working on or talking about is? And then something I also really like to highlight is progression of responsibility. And if you've been at a company or on a project for a little bit, maybe you went from being an individual contributor to being a tech lead, or even working as on like defining epics for a project, and really showing that as you've really grown as an engineer and taken on some of that additional technical leadership skills. And then just kind of
Sorry, because we had a new grad question, I want to call out the new grad progression of responsibility here real quick. Because you're probably not going to have that, like I've had this job and this job and this job. What you can talk about is in your school projects, did you do like the variety of how your projects were done? Were they all individual? When you got into that group if you did a group project, what were the dynamics there? What role did you take on within that group is also a good way to show that.
Cool. And then kind of just in general, keep in mind to use action words such as coordinated, produced, devised, formalized. Some of my other favorite ones are refactored or and I think one thing to always keep in mind is to help each other out. This is something that I've found a lot of value in, is working with other people to talk about things we've done and really help us frame what we've worked on and kind of help build our confidence.
Yeah, the Slackbot is another good example of this. We have it in our women in engineering community. It feels like a good, safe place to do that. I will just say, like, they don't even have to be helping each other out. Doesn't have to be somebody that you work with. It can be outside of your work, just somebody that you can bounce ideas off of and brag to, and allow them to brag about themselves is incredibly helpful. So help Megan and I, we're going to solicit some feedback from you. What was your main takeaway from today? What are you happy that you learned? What are you going to take away from today? I know my main takeaway was getting some of those other examples in there. I really liked the data scientist and being able to like talk about filling the pipeline. That's awesome. Yes, write everything down, always. That's my
my main takeaway is that we did this presentation because it was one of my goals a couple of years ago to really get more confident and involved in presenting. And so it was something that I really wanted to improve upon and has framed a lot of my previous experience.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, I like constructive and active documentation of your accomplishments. It's so much easier if you do them in little chunks rather than everything all the way down. Great. These are going to keep yes, metrics. That should just be my slogan for everything. Awesome. So hopefully everybody gives themselves a self 5. That's the goal, is that you're going to be your own best advocate. So if you start using some of these tools to be able to talk about yourself, the more confident, the more precise you are going to come off. We're going to open it up to some Q&A for the last 5 or so minutes. But if we don't get to your question, or if you just want to reach out, Megan and I's LinkedIn profiles are here. We both check it relatively frequently. So please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll open it up to questions now.
Hey, so we do have a couple.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. We do have a couple questions queued up. The first question in Q&A is from Natalie. And she asks, I'm self-employed, but I'm a digital designer focused on working with technology and software firms as a consultant. Do you have any additional tips when you're the one eternally in charge of your own self-review and advocacy?
Yeah, I think the key there is on networking, right? Because if you're trying to work with those companies, yeah, you probably don't have the like self-review and one-on-one. I mean, I guess you could talk to yourself about all the great things that you do, but get practice talking to other people about it. So that's kind of where that help each other out. So if you know somebody who has a similar profession to you and you're like, hey, I'm about to go talk to this company, I want to present this, can you help me talk through that? I think is the way I would go about it. Megan, I'm sure do you have anything else to add to it?
I'm trying to kind of reflect on, I did a short stint as a freelancer before I started my current job. And I think the biggest thing that I kept in mind was making sure that what I was doing, I was really keeping track of, because I kind of felt it easy to kind of get a little bit lost in, I guess, not being dragged along with what the company wanted, but kind of essentially being, or what their goals were a little bit not entirely aligned with mine. And so I really had to kind of reflect and keep in mind my goals as I worked on all of that and keep track of them for in the future. So I could add that to I have a little website that I added a lot of the stuff actually from my freelance career and really highlighted some of it.
Actually perfectly pairs with the response Wendy gave in the Q&A to create goals and reflect on the progress made on those goals, which is great. The next question / comment was actually made really early on in the chat, and I just thought this would be a great time to kind of reflect on this, if that's all right with the commenter. Carissa said, even if women are willing to promote themselves and their accomplishments, the perception of women when they self-promote is often more negative than when men do the same, which is definitely a challenge. If you have any response or reflections on that.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating when that happens. I think I've just started, to be honest, I'm just very open and honest with my managers, which is probably not the way most people go about it. So I tell them just straight up, I don't want to be pushed into the managerial track, which is also tends to happen with women. I want to be in this tech track, and we work together to kind of like set the goals, so it doesn't come off as like I'm being overly braggy or over self-promoting as a woman, because they already know I'm working towards it. So I start that conversation really early, and then as I'm making achievements towards it, that's kind of my way of combating it. I know we all have slightly different ways, but that one's mine. Megan, thoughts?
So I'm kind of coming at the opposite direction. I was very, very bad at the self-promotion stuff. And when we initially worked on this presentation, I went back and was reading some of my mid-year reviews from a couple years ago. And it was just, I actually went and wrote a note to my manager, basically thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. So I have kind of gotten to the point where I am trying to be more comfortable talking about it. And so I really do focus on framing things in the really actionable accomplishments, and also things that really tie into what my company or the engineering community is looking for.
Yeah, and I will just, this is probably a little obvious, but I think it's on all of us to really reflect on why we think somebody is being overly confident. Is it because of their gender or something else? And just reflect on that and say, is that a valid, why am I feeling this way? Should I be feeling this way? That type of thing. And so I think we can all kind of grow from that.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's a good point. We can always examine our own responses to people and then help others examine their responses in an open way. And maybe we can encourage change that way. Another question from Jason. Any book recommendations? He recommends The Art of Possibility by Rosamund Stone Zander and Benjamin Zander.
Oh, I just, Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck is, I was a teacher before I was an engineer, and so that was something I was introduced to a long time ago. I still use it every day, so definitely that one.
+1 on that. Growth mindset has been huge for me as well.
Check that one out.
All right, another question. I think we have time for just this one from the other side. How can we help people feel comfortable at self-promotion in our workspaces so that more ideas are put forward?
Yeah, I think building individual rapport is kind of the first way to do that. So if you have somebody who's really not confident in speaking up in a group, start trying to get their ideas from them individually first, build up that rapport together, and then start encouraging them or saying, hey, this person had a really good idea about this. Do you want to explain more? And give them a little bit, that helps give them a little bit more validity or feel like they have more validity. So yeah, that would be my quick advice. Again, thank you all so very much. I know Megan and I both appreciate it. We hope you have a lovely rest of your Denver Startup Week. Thank you, Therese, for moderating. You've all been great.
All right, thank you, everyone.